what are physical forces? They're an affinity, a connection, or a repulsion. That's all they are. They're either pulling together or pushing apart. And either way, it's a kind of like you say, it's an affinity. It's a kind of a willing entity, right? I mean, this was even Schopenhauer was kind of famous. He did lots of analogies. He said, look, all the forces of nature are just manifestations of the will. That's really all they are. They're either an attractive affinity or a repelling affinity, but they're still manifestations of will. So that goes right down to the forces of nature.
That's right. So it's interesting. We can go back to errors of technology that your friends in Helsinki are after here.
Yeah.
I might discuss that a little bit with more alchemy and ancient Hebrew, or maybe modern Hebrew. But my studies have shown this. So I studied this as fire. How do you get someone to do the wrong thing? So you cause them. You're gonna cause them to do the thing they know to be wrong. So it's conscientiousness. And their consciousnness is going to positively engage, because we're going to override that by addition of fire to the situation. So what is the as fire? And the Hebrew for that is kash. And that is the that just I said, in a million billion years I never thought the study of Hebrew would be worth anything to me. And I'm like, man, it's so ultimately revealing of the basic underpinnings of what is, that I'm truly in awe of it. Because it's like this, the people do the wrong things because they are incentivized to do so by the social systems that we have generated. And it is like, okay, so we reward people for doing the wrong things. They're going to do the wrong things. At least, in the aggregate sense, we'll get some of them doing the wrong things at some price.
Sure.
And it's like, so the Helsinki guys are like trying to figure out how to de-incentivize doing the wrong thing somehow. And I'm like, that is no small task.
Well, right, exactly. I mean, in the social realm, you have lots of structural problems. You have this orientation towards growth. So you have economic growth, right? You have the growing consumption of energy and material flows, and you have capitalist tendencies towards growth, because every corporation, which is a business entity, wants to grow. I mean, talking about the will, I mean, there it is right there. You see it in corporate activities, in bureaucracies, even human populations. There's this tendency in any animal population to grow. So yeah, when you look at really sustainable societies, you have to grapple with these expressions of the will, right? Of corporate and biological entities that really want to expand and grow and consume resources. And yeah, I mean, at a small scale, back in ancient times, that's not an issue. But today, when you have large corporations and 8 billion people on the earth and powerful technology at your disposal, then all these ancient, motivations, they become highly destructive. I mean, they worked well for a while and then they turn against you. And so this is a huge battle that we're up against, right? Trying to understand these forces that are deeply rooted, but have now turned against us and have to somehow be restrained or channeled in a different direction, so that sort of everybody can survive, because otherwise, it looks very bad in the long run.
Okay. This seems to point to Nietzsche a little bit too. Will zur Macht, right? Like
What's that?
Will zur Macht, the will to power.
Will to power, yeah, from Nietzsche, yeah.
That's where we're at, and it's like, we're back in the jungle again, right? It's like this, the tooth and nail. It's rough, and it's like, what's that mean? How do we restrain these forces? It is the unethical application of powerful technologies to dominate the other participants in the jungle system. And it's like, this points to, I would call this as like, natural law is like the premise that we know how to behave properly in an ethical fashion and cooperate with one another and minimize the amount of friction that we have in our interactions. And that's natural law, and that's what we should be striving for, so that we achieve a reasonable, agreeable solution to our social problems. And it's like the unethical have chosen manners to restrain and constrain and apply force to the situation, which is the same issue, in a positivist way, to create restraints on cooperation and to prevent cooperation in as many ways as possible, so as to monopolize the interactions between people for the gain of the, I guess, the ownership class. And that's how I look at it. And I'm like, the question is, how do we resume or trend towards a more natural state, which requires a moral underpinning that is with ethics as opposed to absent ethics. So I'm back to conscientiousness versus mere consciousness, which is no, we don't want mere consciousness. We want the conscientious application of science and technology universally.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have, because it costs too much to force people. Just like this, we're going to go back to the ancient Hebrews, like cash. If I got to keep on cashing out to make everybody do the wrong thing so I profit, that's going to get expensive, which is probably why we have these episodic crashes economically, because it's like, it's just, okay, it's predictable. And cyclic, it's like, yeah, it costs too much to crash the system and you go set it up somewhere else with what you took away, what you rooted out of the last situation. And so I'm like, I think that's what has been occurring. And I tend towards conspiratorial. My dad can't talk to me, the history professor. I'll tell you this is, I tell stories on my dad. I feel bad. I shouldn't do that, but I will. I asked him the question. I said, you know what? It occurs to me that if you think what I'm talking about is conspiracy or conspiracy theory, that it does not matter how much evidence I bring to bear. And he agreed with that. And I was shocked. And I'm like, wow, okay. That tells me all I need to know. It's like it's the gatekeeper has closed the door, right? And you're not getting into the academy with that one, buddy. And it's okay. But
yep.
The issue, though, is I think that we're at this point where we have to discard consciousness as an even interesting thing, but and adapt conscientiousness. We're back to 1200 AD, where we must have made a wrong turn about that time, I figure. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, you definitely need to reintegrate that moral or ethical component, right? I mean, and not just in the human sphere. This is where the environmental piece comes in, right? So, much of my work when I teach environmental ethics is trying to make the case that, look, you need to take these same moral concepts and moral principles and moral consideration and extend them to nature as well, so that you don't get this narrow focus on what's good for human beings, and then you leave out all the other guys, all the animals and the plants and nature at large, and then you will end up with bad outcomes, right? You try to narrowly benefit one species, and you penalize the other species or the system as a whole, and this of course is a negative outcome. So another aspect of what I do is try to extend these ethical concepts in a rational way to all of nature, right? To animals and plants and the biosphere as a whole, which makes a nice connection to the panpsychism, actually, because you can say, well, look, these things are end-minded things. They are aware, they're conscious, maybe they have a conscience as well, right? So they have sort of their own ends in themselves, and so there's an actual literal basis to treat them as valued ethical entities, because they have this kind of mental quality that's fundamentally the same as our own, maybe not as complex and not as elaborate, but it's still there, like we do. So we actually have a real philosophical or metaphysical basis for valuing these things in nature and including them in our ethical schemes in a way that maybe we've never really had before. So that's another way of extending the ethics to the whole planet, and then acting on that basis.
I like that. I resonate with that in this construct, which is when we talk about the mind, we think about it as a noun. And I'm like, it also is a verb, to mind. And it's like, yeah, the universe minds. And it's minding what you're doing, and what you're inattentive towards is also, it's making notes and minding. And you will be brought to to some kind of judgment with regard to how well you minded your business, right? And it's like, so it certainly goes to the panpsychism. I'm very excited about the premise of it, and I'm like, yeah, it's quite a challenge though. It's like I would regard it as an intentional function, which is the demoralization of the population in the general sense, distraction of them, and the application of technologies that are designed to addict them to things that are not good. And I specifically am going to point to social media, which had neuroscientists helping them to create little dopamine pushes when you're participating in their addictive software, which has been discussed by former executives of those institutions, which is absolutely abusive technology, in my opinion, which is like, it's not hard to cause someone to be addicted to something, especially unwittingly. You know, it's like you don't know what you're getting. You're just interested in it and you don't know why, but the dopamine keeps coming, so it must be all right, right? And it's like, but so the humans are yeah, it's a predatory function of technical systems that are without consideration of the moral basis of it all, right? And so shoot, I don't know where that leaves us.
Well, right. I mean, you know, it exploits people. It exploits their abilities and their interests and their desires and their needs, right? And technological systems are very good at exploiting people's weaknesses in that sense, right? So it plays upon them and it feeds your, you know, your little sense of ego and whatever, and your sense of wanting friends and all those connections and so forth. And so it really kind of sucks you in. I think it's really gotten good at the hitting the little buttons, psychological buttons that motivate people to do these things, right? Yeah, I mean, you know, for myself, I'm interested to study this. I try to stay unplugged from these things as much as possible. You know, I mean, I kind of do the minimum. I'll do you know, conference calls and email, but
Right.
for myself, I don't do any social media. I don't have a cell phone that I use in any sense. I mean, so I'm really trying to keep aloof from these things to make sure that you know, you don't get to. I spend already enough time, you know, writing and communicating and so forth. But you know, the last thing I need is these other draws on my attention.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Best Medicine Podcast with Bradley H. Werrell, D.O. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe below, either over there or over there. Also, if you're interested in a medical consultation with myself, there's also information below.